We are live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content channel. My name is Tony Vicinda. I'm Chief Alchemist here at Plus One EXP, which is a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard, and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Our hope and desire is to help amazing designers find great players who love their games and help amazing players find great designers whose games they can love. We do that in a lot of different ways, but my favorite way is actually just sitting down with those designers to talk about them, about the games they're making and their design process. Today we're having somebody who I think we may have interacted in a Facebook forum about 6 months ago about having on stream, but has been tremendously influential for a lot of other guests that we've had on and makes games that I absolutely love. And that's Jason Morningstar. Jason, why don't you tell people who you are, what you do, and tell us a little bit about some of the games that you make.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to, Tony. Thank you for having me. And your beard game is definitely on point. So congratulations there. My pronouns are he, him. And you want to hear about what now?
Just who you are, what you do. Just do a general little intro for people who may or may not know you.
Great. So I'm Jason Morningstar. My company is Pulpit Games. I'm the creative director there, which means mostly that I'm designing games for the company. I've been making tabletop and live action role-playing games for 15 years or more. And that's sort of what I do. That's my job.
Awesome. Which is a great job to have. And you are somebody who I think a lot of people are very familiar with one of your games, or a lot of people who follow our channel are very familiar with one of your games. And it is probably, when I ask people about games that influenced them and shifted the way that they thought about tabletop role-playing games, Fiasco is oftentimes one of the names that gets mentioned here on channel. But you have created an absolutely amazing list of games. And one of the things that I love about your design specifically is that they are storytelling games and RPGs that you can trick your friends who only play board games into playing without them even knowing they're necessarily playing an RPG at first. I remember we broke out Ghost Court at a fairly large event a few years back, and everybody's like, "Oh, like this, like we can all play this game." And I was like, "We can all play this game. It's going to be a great night." People had an absolute blast. And if I'd said, "Hey, all 15 of us are going to play an RPG," they would be like, "We don't want to. What is that, and how would that work?" So, as a channel that has a passion for tricking board gamers into playing RPGs, especially, we salute your work. No, but a lot of award-winning games, a lot of great things. Really, somebody who helped define the space of indie RPGs and has continues to drive us in new directions. You do have a game right now that's live over on GameFound. Will you tell us a little bit about Desperation?
I will, but before I do, I just want to say I don't advocate tricking anybody into anything. Full transparency, let them know what they're getting into, unless you're tricking them for the right reasons. But okay, so Desperation, which we're crowdfunding right now on GameFound, is I guess you'd call it a survival horror game without the survival. It's sort of folk horror meets prairie gothic meets ocean murder. It's a game that combines my love of history with putting people into really impossible positions and making players make difficult choices for them. So you play people who are sort of on the edge of survival in different situations, and they have to decide what they're going to do to make it to the other side. And spoiler alert, most of them will not make it to the other side. So within Desperation's a game engine, and what we're crowdfunding are two different experiences using that engine, one of which takes place during a blizzard in Kansas in 1888, and one of which is about a shipwreck off the coast of Alaska in 1888. And they're both historically accurate. They're based on actual events. And you sort of play the people that were involved, and it's pretty dark. It gets dark fast.
I love it. And uniquely to this game, and let me see if I can say it right, you don't decide who you are and where you're at and what you say. You decide who says what at certain locations during the game, correct?
Oh, you almost got it right.
Almost close. Right.
So yeah, so it's the thing that I'm most excited about, and that I think is super interesting about the game, is that it's going to tell you what happens. Things are going to happen, but those things are described from a first-person perspective. So you're actually going to read from the back of a card a thing that happens. but the game doesn't tell you who says that. So you are making the decision in that moment, which of the characters is saying those words. And the really fun thing about it is, A, the things that they're saying are horrible, and B, your own innate ability to match patterns, even where there aren't patterns to match, which is just sort of a human brain function called apophenia, means that you're going to know, and it feels like magic. So when you read that card, you're like, oh yeah, this is Lestenkopf. It's absolutely, these are Lestenkopf's words, even though there's nothing in the game that tells you that, and it feels really magical and cool.
Awesome. One of our good friends, Duck in the chat, asked, was Edward Gorey an inspiration for any of this by any chance?
I love Edward Gorey, and I don't think so. Not for Desperation. The tone here is real hard bitten. There's not a lot of whimsy in these games, which is something that I associate with Gorey. You would have to bring and often humor creeps into it, but it's gallows humor, right?
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. Well, let's step back a little bit. We're gonna deep dive like we always do into Desperation a little bit later. Awesome. If folks have questions, feel free, drop them in as we're going. If you're watching later on, you have questions, drop them in the comments. If I can't answer them, I'll get Jason's attention. We'll get an answer for you also too. But with that said, why don't you tell us just a little bit about how you started playing RPGs? Obviously, you're somebody with a great design history. Obviously, shout out to GURPS Steampunk, one of my favorite supplements in the GURPS 3rd edition line. And I totally forgot that you were one of the credited writers in that till I was looking through things.
Yeah, I have a lot of weird early GURPS credits as just a contributor. I was in low tech as well.
Yeah.
So some different early toes in the water of mainstream publishing there.
Yeah, I started in GURPS right around the time that a lot of those supplements were coming out.
It was an awesome way to sort of a way to get into the hobby in a semi-professional but very constrained way. So awesome. Yeah, me too.
Tell us about how you started playing.
Yeah. So I've been playing games all my life. My dad and my uncle were war gamers, so I was familiar with like hexes and chit kinds of war games and miniatures war games just as a tiny child. And my uncle brought over white box D&D one night. He had been to the hobby store, and the guy sold him on that. It was early 77 probably, and he didn't know what to do with it. And he was explaining it to my dad and trying to understand how it would work. And my brother and I just went and took it from him and said, we know what to do with that. Don't worry about it. We got it. And we were off to the races. So we started playing right away. It made sense to us. And I've been playing role-playing games ever since.
That's awesome. So you start with White Box. What any other major games that for you,
you
were playing were just super influential you fell in love with?
Yeah, totally. So we played White Box D&D, and then we played AD&D, and then we played Traveler for years. We switched over to Traveler and loved it, original Traveler. And that led to lots of other games. We got really into realism for a while. We were playing games like the Morrow Project, where you're counting blood points, and weapons are graded with inches of penetration in white pine and ballistic gelatin and craziness. We played a lot of Morrow Project. I grew up in Metro Detroit, and there was a really interesting design scene at the time in the early to mid 80s there. Games like Stalking the Night Fantastic, Bureau 13, Fringeworthy, FTL 2448. These were all essentially like homemade games that got a little bit of traction and were really important to me. And I was involved with them sort of in the convention scene. And then, of course, I was playing them at home.
Awesome.
And then GURPS, I was super into the Fantasy Trip, which is the precursor to GURPS, and then played a ton of GURPS. And the nice thing about that, of course, is that you can pare it down to whatever level of crunch you're interested in. And I found that I had pared it to nothing at some point until it stopped being GURPS. And was sort of the beginning of my journey into bespoke game design. I think anybody who like hacks a game is really a designer.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's the most unique thing I think about our industry and hobby is that like the line between whether it's a hobby or an industry is very malleable as far as how high up do you get on home brewing before you're like, oh, I've made a completely new thing. And so I love hearing it. I also love like whenever somebody tells me GURPS is super crunchy, I'm like, I mean, yeah, but I can teach somebody GURPS in like 2 minutes. Like if we're just going to play, like they have to create a character. Yeah, we need a couple of hours to pull through everything. But I could also just say like, what are things you're good at? What are innate abilities you have? Cool. How good are you at those? Write those things down. And in 5 minutes, we could be up and playing GURPS with that person. And I've done it a few different times. And I always tell people the two most important, earlier today, I told people the two most important rules in the book are never let the rules get in the way of a fun time out of characters, and then in campaigns, when in doubt, roll and shout. And so like the 100% my ethos for GURPS is I love how crunchy you can get, but I also love how at the table it's like, no, here's what you need to know, and that's it. Let's play. And so no, that's awesome. But yeah, that line is I think very malleable. So you kind of tipped over that at one point. You said you kind of stepped in with some of those GURPS titles. What were some of the kind of early things you were looking for as you started kind of making some of these bespoke experiences and stepping a little bit more intentionally into design?
Yeah, well, so what I was looking for was what was going to be the most fun with the people I was sitting around a table with, right? And that still guides my design practice today. You'll see the sort of unit of play that is a benchmark for most of my games happens to be, for some reason, the amount of time I have to spend with my friends every week. So like we play in 2-hour chunks. So my games are really predicated around a 2 to 3 hour unit of play because of that. So I was working toward things that were going to be fun for my group. And my group was suddenly no longer interested in super crunchy mechanics or trying to model realism. We were interested in drama and emotion. And so like it just sort of one thing led to another. And pretty soon we were making our own stuff. And I was bringing them bespoke experiences to try at the table, some of which then became games, some of which just were, it was that campaign. And then we never looked back at it.
Awesome. What was one of the first ones that tilted over into that? Like, I mean, I should know this. I should have done more prep, though. You've got, again, there's so many things I would love to talk to you about that I was like, all right, here's the games I know I want to talk about. What was the first title that kind of you and Bully Pulpit at that point in time potentially put out as here's a game we want to share with the world?
Oh yeah. So the first game we published was called the Shab al-Hiri Roach. And it's a comedy game. It's a dark comedy that sort of makes fun of academia. I was in graduate school when I wrote it, and it's about my experiences. A lot of my games are, it's all self-expression, right? So right. At the time, I was deep in grad school, stressed out, and so I made a game about an ancient Sumerian god king that finds themselves trapped on an academic campus, and all the hijinks that ensue. From that. And so, yeah, that's a game that was designed for my local crew, many of whom were in the same experience, and sort of emerged as something that other people could play because people I respected played it and were like, when are you going to publish this? This is great. And it hadn't even occurred to me that was an option. And I was like, I guess I'm going to publish it soon.
I guess when I get around to it. No, I love that. And I'm so grateful to those people for actually saying, hey, you should do this. But again, there are so many titles you put out. I remember the first game I think I purchased that y'all made was the Skeletons, which was even before I had played Quiet Year. But for people who are familiar with the Quiet Year but haven't heard of the Skeletons, there's some very similar vibes. If you enjoy one, you'll probably enjoy the other. But it was a totally different way of thinking about play and thinking about the way you engage it. That was the moment for me that I was like, I love this. So anything I ever saw from that point in time that had Bully Pulpit logo on it, I was like, I'm going to go ahead and grab this. And luckily, my friendly local game store has always had a great selection of indie RPGs, or at least when I lived in Seattle, it did. Philly, who knows? I've only been here for 2 years doing a global pandemic. But we were talking a little bit beforehand. You have one of your favorite titles of mine that I've picked up and pulled out and flipped through the deck of a number of times, but never gotten a chance to play. But I think has continued to evolve in its relevance in our world today. Is Winterhorn. For people who aren't familiar with it, you tell us a little bit about what it is and what influenced that design.
Yeah, sure. So Winterhorn is a game. It's sort of a hybrid live action tabletop game that is about a group of government agents that have been tasked with destroying or degrading an activist group that the government has decided is dangerous. And you play these agents, and you have a whole variety of techniques that are pulled from real life to use to harass, intimidate, intercept the transmissions of this activist group, and you learn more about them as you play. And it's a game that's really designed to help people think about how to harden their own activism, because all the techniques you're using as the government in this case are actual techniques that are used in real life. So you get familiar with them, and then you can after playing the game ask the question, what if this is happening to me? What's my operational security look like around using digital communication? What would happen if somebody broke into our base of operations and looked through all their files? What would happen if we received a document that said that the leader of our activism was actually, an agent of the government, an informer? What would we do? How would we handle that? And these are all real world situations that I think are important. I wrote the game in early 2016. I was inspired for some reason in early 2016 to be thinking real hard about those issues. And it's a super interesting game to play. It does. I talked earlier about not tricking people. Winterhorn kind of tricks you a little bit because it sets you up with a goal, right? You have a mission, and gamers with a mission will achieve that objective. That's what they're going to do. And often when you play Winterhorn, it ends in high fives as you put these people in jail, you destroy them, you ruin their lives, and in retrospect, when you sort of put the information together, you have to question whether you did the right thing or not.
Yeah.
What never happens when you play Winterhorn is for someone to say, "Hey, are we the baddies? What are we doing the right thing? Should we have done that?" That doesn't happen. What happens is you get a real focus on achieving the goal, and the game will allow you to achieve that goal much of the time.
Right. You never want to trick the player, but sometimes tricking the character is a little bit different.
Yeah.
I love the narrative evolution that's able to come out of that. And the game, I think, takes advantage. Like nowadays, if somebody played that, they'd like pop up a Miro board and you'd play it online and you could talk through a lot of that stuff. This is a point at which, like, when this game came out, online conferencing tools, those things existed, but they were much harder to access than they are now. But it was something that as soon as I saw it on the shelf, I was immediately drawn to a lot of the themes and other things happening in it too. For whatever reasons in 2016, that seemed really attractive. Who could say? But it was such a interesting game that invited us to create boards, to track relationships, look at a lot of other things. Like I said, it's one that I constantly have near my desk as I'm waiting for the right group of people to play this game with, and have not yet had a chance to find that right group of people. Deck is asking in the chat about the name of the game. It's Winterhorn, like the season and like a thing that would grow out of your head. There you go, right there. And so tremendous narrative concept that, again, just waiting for the right group of people. And like I mentioned at the top, people are probably very, if they're familiar with your work, there's a strong likelihood that they are familiar with Fiasco, which has now been released one time as a book with a number of supplements, and is currently now been upgraded to a card format, which I think sings really, really well also too. And love seeing that kind of design shift from a game I already loved the stories you got to tell with into a completely different format, but still doing the exact same thing. And being able to see that translation was very cool a few years ago. And I love kind of what it spawned out in a lot of the RPG community of we we don't have to just make books. We can make other types of storytelling games. Starcross does something very similar. I think y'all do a really good job of thinking about the medium and the way it's presented in a way to create accessibility around your games. For people who have never heard of Fiasco though before, who may stumble upon this, why don't you tell us a little bit about Fiasco?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So Fiasco is a game about dumb people getting in trouble. It flips the script on the usual role-playing emphasis on competence and on power and success. It's a game where you want to be incompetent and you probably are going to fail. It's modeled on neo-noir fiction. So it's usually people who have they have powerful ambition and poor impulse control. And it's built around play sets. And a play set is going to give you all the pieces that you need to start a disaster in motion. And an example of a play set is Poppleton Mall. So there's all the pieces that you need. There are objects, needs, relationships, and locations within the mall that are just going to be primed to create a real fun, stupid disaster. And you can play it in a couple of hours. It's pretty straightforward. It's very accessible, and even non-role players usually can get into it.
Yeah. No, it also, I think it's one of the things I love about the mechanics of it, are specifically the die roll mechanics that people accrue, or the kind of fate that people accrue as they go through, that's going to swing things very wildly at the end, one way or the other. I think it's a piece of mechanical tech that doesn't get talked about enough in the RPG space, because I think there's so many great things you can do with it. And there's tons of other great ways to track kind of the fated realities of something, but the swing of that piece of tech one way or the other, the total kind of surprise that it can pull out at the end of a game, is one of the things that has always just kind of struck me as really beautiful about the game. And I think that's kind of one of my questions for that is, like, was there a lot of playtesting that went into that particular part of the mechanic, or was that something that you came up with early on in the design process for it and just kind of stuck with it?
No, there's a lot of iteration, a lot of playtesting around the framework and structure of the game. One thing that you see when you play Fiasco is that there are two acts and then an aftermath. And in early iterations of the game, there were 3 acts, because I was emulating fiction or film, right? And so in films, typically there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's specific things that happen in each phase. And it just didn't work. The game took too long. The 3rd act was anticlimactic and boring because of the way the other mechanisms worked. But as soon as I stripped that out and truncated that into just an aftermath step where you find out sort of what happens to the characters, it became much more approachable. It achieved my objectives, and then it was just a matter of fine-tuning it. But that was a big cognitive leap, because I was really modeling a particular kind of cinematic fiction. Yeah. So yeah, it took a long time to get that just right, and thank you for noticing. I'm very happy with the way that works at the table.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's one of those pieces where, like, I've seen a lot of people who have written Fiasco like playbooks and other things to play within the world of Fiasco, but I'm always surprised that I don't see that outcome swing effect borrowed as a piece of tech in other games
it is interesting,
more than we currently do. Because I think a lot of times things that are, I feel like as seminal as that, because anytime I play or watch the game be played, like, it's a moment of, like, awe around the table as people watch how all of the accumulated realities of the first 2 acts kind of come to this point of, like, okay, now we're going to find out what happens, but we're all going to be surprised. We're all going to be delighted by this. And even though there's that in the beats of every single moment of play, as you're telling the story, you're so focused in those moments on the storytelling that there's no ability to step back and just experience that dice roll as you enter into the aftermath is a moment where all of a sudden, like, okay, none of us are actually having to think as we're doing this at this moment, and we're all just kind of able to focus in on this. And for me, it is one of those things that is this moment where everybody can be surprised. And I think in GM-less play, that's one of the things we're all kind of striving for, is like, okay, we want everybody to experience this wonder simultaneously. But when we're so focused in on the narrative and playing the game well, we aren't always able to step back and take it in that way. And it just provides that moment in a really distinctive way that I think not a lot of other games allow you to do. in that moment. We talk about this a lot on stream right now, but Theorized by Jason Cordova, that's part of Brindlewood Bay, is the closest I feel like you get when you get to kind of pull back. And there's a few other games that do similar moves or other things as a late game mechanic that kind of let everybody pull back and take a different perspective on what's going to happen and then dive in and then go back into the resolution process narratively. And any of those things that you get, I think, especially in GM-less play or GM play, are just some of my favorite moments around the table. And so to have a system that intentionally does that is so beautiful. A lot of your games focus on GM-less play, really kind of creating a space at the table where everybody kind of owns the narrative. Was that an early on choice for you, or is it something you've just kind of gravitated to throughout the course of design process?
I think for me anyway, games tell me what they want to be. I'm kind of honoring the intention of the design. And that's an early decision that's going to assert itself. How is authority and credibility distributed in this framework? And sometimes you get it wrong as a designer and have to kind of retool it because the game tells you actually this needs a GM or this needs a different way to balance these things out. But I love playing with people, and I think that 6 brains are smarter than 1 and will come up with something better. And so my default is going to be to distribute that authority as equally as possible so that other people can contribute and make me look better. I think that's just a design default based on my play preference. But sometimes the game will be like, actually, no, that's not what we need here. We need a central authority, and maybe that authority can rotate, or maybe that authority switches from time to time, or maybe it's just a guy in a Viking hat. But if that's what the game needs, that's the direction I'll go.
I love that statement though about honoring what the game wants. Tell me a little bit. This is an abstract question. Tell me a little bit about how you listen to the game. Like, what does that mean for you?
That's a deep question, Tony. and very abstract. I think that this is it's a skill, right? It's something that you learn by doing, by making games. So if someone watching this is interested in becoming a game maker, they should make a lot of games, and they can be bad. I make many, many bad games, many terrible games. And I'm happy to talk about those too, but they don't see the light of day because they're failures, and that's fine. I learned something from them. I take something from them. They just weren't ready. I wasn't ready, whatever, lots of failure. But when you're making a game, you kind of have to listen to it. And that sounds kind of woo-woo, I guess. But what that means is that as you're playing or as you're play testing, and this can happen anywhere from just sort of running through it mentally, how the procedures are going to work, to sitting down at the table with people and actually seeing how it works. There'll be moments of hesitation, confusion, friction that are really subtle, that might be telling you something. So that's one direction, like having your antenna really tuned to the quiet moments of where someone's like, I understand how to do this because I'm a gamer and I've been gaming all my life. So we're going to do it, but I don't know. And that's something you can just kind of see in people's body language sometimes. And the other piece to that is that sometimes it just asserts itself, and I don't know where it comes from, right? So there's an analytical piece to it, but there's also sort of a emotional or not a subjective piece to it, where you're just like, yeah, this doesn't work right. And what I need to do is question my assumptions and make a change based on that.
Awesome. I'd love to maybe talk about 2 kind of case scenarios within that. What's a game that made it pretty far along? Maybe almost you thought it was completely done, and then as you were listening to it, you just couldn't resolve that and kind of fell off. Do you have maybe an example of a game that you were like, that was going along really well, and then as you were listening to it, you were like, oh, this just doesn't work?
Yeah, well, I never approach it that way. If a game isn't working, I just put it away. I put it away for a while. And it's either going to get cut up for parts, or it's going to, the piece that I'm missing will come to me, or the technology will improve in the world, and then I'll be able to make it. A good example of that is Night Witches, which is my game about Soviet bomber pilots during World War II.
Yeah.
When I first learned about the Night Witches, I was so excited, and I devoured all the primary source material I could find. And I wanted to make a game about them because they're amazing. And I did, and it was terrible. I just made this awful game that was boring and stupid. And my friends who played it were like, yeah, that's a cool topic, but your game is boring and stupid. So I put it in a drawer. I just said, this is a good idea, but the game's not good. And the game is not, I don't have what I need to make it good. And then 3 or 4 years later, I played Apocalypse World, and like a light went off. I was like, this is the technology that is missing. With this technology, I can make the game that kicks ass, that does the things I needed to do. And I revisited it and sort of got Vincent's permission and made it using the Apocalypse World engine, and it solved that problem. So I was just patient, and that it found its voice because of that.
Awesome. Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, and then Durance is another example of a game that started out. My game Durance is about life in a penal colony, and you play simultaneously. You play 2 characters. You play a convict and a guard. And they're on different levels of the hierarchy in terms of their power within their own societies. And that game started out as a game about romance. I wanted to make a romance game, like a romance novel emulator kind of game. That's what I was trying to make. And that didn't work because I'm not an expert at that. And I quickly came to realize that I didn't understand how romances worked. And that I would need to either find an expert or I would need to just put the project in a drawer for a while, which I did. And then when the idea for Durance came along, I realized that the technology existed. I'd already made it. I just needed to sort of reskin it to emulate the things, the sort of relationships and interactions that were important in a penal colony instead of in a romance.
Love it. No, and it's always interesting to see like the themes that come up for a creator who I think is pursuing design in the way that you are a lot of the time. Like there are people who obviously just design because they're like, okay, this is what I do and I want to go sell this game now. And so I'm going to go make a game and try to make it hot. And it's a mode of design, and it's not one that I play a lot of games by people who operate in that way. But you really, like you said, it's about the game that your table wants and about the things that you're interested in expressing. And I think a lot of the times, not just specifically relationships, but a lot of the games that you create, and a lot of my experience of playing those games, so this could be totally wrong, deal with themes around power, and specifically power in a relationship. That could be relationships between entities, organizations, other stuff like that, or it could be between individuals. There could also be just some of the mechanical tech that just kind of says, how are we sharing power around the table? And a lot of times it's even subverting that, right? Like saying, like, what is the giving up of this power, control, other things look like, is my experience of playing it, right? And I don't know if that resonates with you at all. I don't know if that's a theme that necessarily you're not necessarily obsessed with, but that you see as popping up in your games on a regular basis. I don't know if that's something that resonates with you, but I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about my experience of playing your games and seeing that as a pattern potentially.
I do. I think that's astute, and I won't deny that. But I'm not sure that's the thing I'm trying to wrestle with or communicate. I think that's the most interesting part of play. So for me, the really exciting things are interpersonal dynamics and dynamics between people and institutions. So putting those things in conflict, in opposition, and in concordance just makes for fun play, and it gets you right to the heart of whatever the problem is. So I'm always drawn to that because I want you to sit down and immediately be confronted with challenging situations and exciting decisions to be made. And that's, for me, that's where those decisions live. Yeah. So like if I'm excited about some topic, that's the thing I'm going to look for in it. Right. I don't want to meticulously recreate the Treaty of Versailles. What I want to do is put you in the room where they're writing the Treaty of Versailles and get people fighting, right? Or get people loving, or whatever the vibe is. I'm looking for those power imbalances, because that's just the fun stuff for me.
Well, no, and I think it drives actions really quickly. Like I said, I don't think it's you're obsessed with power, but like I said, it's something I see come up a lot, and I love that concept of like, this is what drives pressure and fun within the context of what's happening in this story that I want you to sit down and be able to tell. I think that's tremendous as far as why those things matter, because there are some games that you can get into and just be like, oh yeah, we're just going to kind of explore around and do the thing for the first few sessions, and then we'll kind of leverage that in. Again, like you said, your games are designed to oftentimes be played in a couple of hours with a group of friends, just kind of getting together, making it, and then resolving it. And so you need something that drives that action a little bit more intentionally. So
and I think in like a 10 session campaign, you're going to get those same interactions and levers toward the end of the campaign after you've invested 40 hours in it. And in some ways it'll be much richer because of that, but you've also invested 40 hours and I don't have 40 hours for anything anymore. So that's definitely a goal of mine, is to get to the good stuff fast.
I said, I love that understanding of this is actually what helps drive these experiences also too. Because the other option is for short tips is like, we're going to do a slice of life thing, which is great also too. And I super enjoy slice of life pieces and other things like that. But the quick action being driven by some of that, I think is tremendous. Let's talk a little bit more about Desperation. Let's dive in a little bit closer, because like I said, it's an absolutely gorgeous game. I love the conceit behind what's happening, but these are all drawn off of kind of real world events. These are things that you can actually go back in history and look at it. But what is the thing in your life that kind of attracted you towards the themes that are being explored and the situations that are being explored in Desperation?
Yeah, so this is the game that I had fundamentally wrapped up design of this in late 2019, and we were excited about it. We were ready to go, but a game about slowly dying alone just wasn't going to land in 2020. Just wasn't the right time for it. I'm hoping that now is a better time for it, that we can view it as cathartic. So it was delayed a little bit. But in 2019 and 2018, when I was developing it, I was really interested in this piece of technology, this the idea that I could sort of hack your brain into pattern matching for me, that I could, which you see that in the Aftermath and Fiasco, all that beautiful stuff you were describing. That's apophenia too, right? Where you're like, oh, of course he comes out smelling like a rose. You can see all the pieces fall into place. There's no question that's how it ended. So like I was really excited about that. And the design question was, how do I put this into a context that's going to make it feel like magic and be cool? And so I worked outward from there. I learned about dead houses at some point, which a dead house is a place where you keep corpses when the ground is too hard to dig, when it's frozen. So you find dead houses all over the northern tier of North America. Obviously we don't do it anymore, but there was a time when that was a thing, and you just have to wait till spring to bury your dead. And until then, you'd put them in the dead house. And so I thought, well, that's cool. And I played around with that. And then I started doing some research, and I came up with what was called the Children's Blizzard of 1888. And then I was kind of off to the races. I was like, it's going to be a game about a town that gets snowed in and everything goes to hell. And once I started to build it out, I realized that it was very extensible, that the same mechanisms would work for other kinds of stories. And so to prove that to myself, I wrote another one and I was like, well, if I'm going to do another one, let's connect them. I'll set it in 1888 as well. And then I had this whole thing sort of locked down.
Awesome. Talk to us a little bit again about maybe we mentioned earlier, like the mechanics are that we know that certain things are said. We know the people and the places involved in the situation, but we're kind of working our way through that. Talk to us maybe a little bit about a sample of what that looks like in play.
Awesome. Yeah, let me give you a card from the Isabel. So we're looking at a late game card from the Isabel. And I'm going to read it to you. Now, I just drew this from the deck. It was the next card in sequence as we're playing the game. We have 5 or 6 people left alive. They're on a beach, shipwrecked. And the card I drew is called Butter Clams. Someone who knows better told me not to eat the butter clams I dug up. They said they were poison, but I was too hungry to listen. I ate them all up raw, and now I'm wearing them like a filthy apron and coughing up blood, and I can't talk right, and my vision is fading. I can't even remember my name or why I am here. Speak your truth and go to the deep. Go to the deep means this character dies. And speak your truth is a role-playing prompt. Speak your truth means decide who this is and then either give a little monologue from their point of view or invite someone to have a scene with you. So here's someone who was so hungry they ate something that they knew was poison and they're dying. And at this point in the game, we've got a few characters to choose from, right? I know it's one of these 4 or 5 people, and chances are very good that I'll know exactly who is weak-willed enough to do that, or was tired of suffering and was ready to do that, or whatever the circumstances that you decide are. But I'll know, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that was Harris. No question. Harris did that. And then everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense. Of course it was Harris. Rest in peace, Harris. And then you're down one more and there's only a few people left. So like that's the sort of the core of the game. And that's, I gave you an example close to the end of the game. Like it's getting pretty intense at that point, but the early cards are just establishing tone. There's a third of the deck that's just like, we're on a ship and the ship sucks. And I'm worried about the ship. And then there's a middle section, which is a little more intense. And then there's the end, which is just like all bets are off.
Yeah. And it's like the art and is absolutely evocative for this setting. I think it's incredibly well affected. And I also know that Ray, a good friend of the channel who got to play over on Evil Hat stream the other night, like read something out loud. And we love anytime we get to have Ray on to play anything, but like they read something horrible and was like, that's beautiful. So the things that you get to say are absolutely tremendous. And so like I said, it's a really amazing experience. And again, it's just like a lot of things from Bully Pulpit and from your design. As soon as I read the Kickstarter page, I was like, or the Game Found page, which is, you know, like even as somebody who's run on Game Found, like like as soon as I like read it, or as soon as I like was like going through it and looking at the actual tech that was in it, I was like, this is such a different thing than anything else I've ever played. This is such a new thing, but also immediately being able to see, all right, there's some really amazing core loops here. That ability to kind of walk up and have the game described and be like, yeah, like I can do that. Like I like that. And this one actually, I would say, maybe more than any other game I feel like y'all have put out, people sitting down to a table who are completely never played an RPG before, don't know how to do a storytelling game. It's very easy to get into because you've also given them the thing that a lot of them don't know what to do. And that's, what do I say? Right? Like, What do I say?
So I've seen this happen. I've put this on a table with non-gamers and seen them just tear it up. And part of the reason that works is that it gives you text and you can just read it. It's the box text in a D&D module, if that's all you want to do, but it invites you to do more. And if you don't do more, the game still absolutely is intense and memorable. And if you do, you know, like if Tony, if you and I were sitting down to play, I'm sure we would really get into it and chew the scenery and characterize these people, and it would be so much better. But the core of the game is intact if you don't do any of that, which makes it very safe and very fun for people who don't know. I had it at Ringling College when I was playtesting it, and the students there took it away from me. They just said, we're going to go play this in our dorm with our friends. We'll bring it back tomorrow. And that was so gratifying because they weren't really gamers. They were sort of gamer adjacent, but they liked it enough that they really wanted to show it to their friends and play it. And it's very simple. It's easy to instantiate and welcoming in that way.
And we all know that at a college campus, that means they play Cards Against Humanity, but don't necessarily play a lot of other games, which is really funny because having gone to run games at campuses before, whenever you ask people if they play games, you can tell that kind of pause of, well, like kind of, but not really. And then you throw out a couple. I'm like, those ones. I was like, oh, great.
All right.
No, but I love that. And again, I think it's constantly, even as somebody who has a spouse who really struggles with imaginative play, we struggle to find games that we can both sit down and do, especially the type of games I love, which are high imaginative play, and the ability to even let people engage at the level that they want to, as long as the table's conscious of where everybody's comfortable, I think is tremendous. One of the other things I noted about the game that I'd love you to speak to is that you can play with 1 to 5 players, which means that you can play this game by yourself if you want to. What changes if somebody is playing this as a solo game?
Oh man, I love that question. And everyone always asks, and the answer is nothing. Nothing changes. Because the game is feeding you a narrative, and that narrative is semi-randomized. But what you're doing is making choices, and you're creating a mental map, and you're allowing those patterns to meld in your own consciousness, as instead of a shared consciousness, right? So if you're playing with others, then other people are going to be bringing their own interpretations or suggestions for the characters and locations and events, which I think makes play richer, just because there's more brains working at the table. But if you're playing by yourself, all those decisions are yours.
Awesome.
And instead of like rotating around and drawing cards one at a time, sharing the narrative, you get it all. So it's really your story. But in terms of the way the game proceeds mechanically or procedurally, it's identical.
Awesome. Love it. You talked about the game really having to focus on kind of the pattern matching aspects of looking at how these kind of different pieces fit together. I would love to hear, and nobody should take this as canon of anything they need to do at their table. Are there patterns you have seen as y'all have been play testing of a certain way that certain characters just naturally evolve in a large number of games?
Yeah, there are. And I find that endlessly fascinating. In the Isabel, there's a father and a daughter on board the ship. The captain has brought his daughter for the summer on his cod fishing schooner, against his better judgment. And so that's a relationship that is meaningful to players. People understand what that means, right? They understand the obligation that this man has. They understand the position that the daughter is put in. And when things go to hell, there's tremendous pressure put on that relationship. And so that tends to go in a couple of predictable and really interesting directions. And those directions are never ones that are uncaring or callous, right? It's two people who are trying to save each other's lives, which is just it's deep, right? And in Dead House, you have similar relationships. There are 2 mother-daughter relationships and a father-daughter relationship as well as spouses. So the bonds of kinship are tighter in Dead House, but sometimes not as strong. Sometimes it varies, but yeah, absolutely. I don't even want to get into the predictable things that happen to some of these characters, but there are things that become patterns that you see. It's like, oh, they're going to play Holmes that way. Okay, yep. I've seen that before. Right.
Scott just asked the best question you can possibly ask on stream, which is there a link to buy this game? Yeah, you can go to GameFound, which is, if you've never used it before, my crowdfunding platform of choice, but it's RPGs and story games are very new on there, so they can use all the support they can get. It's also a younger platform than Kickstarter. You can go to GameFound and just type in Desperation, or you can go to ttrpg.link /DesperationGame, and it'll take you right there. There are also links over on the Bully Pulpit website too, if you go there. And if you're watching over on YouTube, which you are, Scott, there's a link in the description that you can click on, and it'll take you directly to it as well.
Thank you for asking that question, Scott. That was the best question.
Always a good question. And with that said, we mentioned it's over on GameFound. This is a new platform for y'all. And it may just be because you wanted to try out a new platform, but I'd love to hear, are there reasons y'all chose to try out GameFound for the first time?
Yeah, for sure. We really want to broaden the ecosystem of crowdfunding. We think it's important that there not be a monolithic choice, that people have some different choices so that you can make ethical decisions about which platform to use. And GameFound was the one we landed on as being appropriate for us where we are now. Everybody's making their own decisions, and some of those are driven by factors that we don't even know. And so I'm not going to criticize anybody for the choices they make at all. But it was the right one for us, and we've been very happy there for sure.
We were early GameFound, a Doctor's Second RPG that was on there for Down We Go. It was before even a lot of things that have come out recently had come out, but it's for the exact same reason. We think it's great when there are a number of options people can choose from and choose what's best for them. We also think that competition oftentimes drives innovation, and so there's a lot of really cool things GameFound does that other platforms don't do, but it's also a newer and younger platform. So I would say this, even if you don't back crowdfunders, even if you like to wait until the game's out in print before you get it, that's totally fine, totally reasonable. Sharing the game online is the second best thing you can do to help a project that's funding right now, because them hearing about a game you're excited about from you and not just from one of the creators is always a big endorsement. You can absolutely tremendously help indie and small press creators when you just share their games on social media, and that is a tremendous way to help if you can't contribute monetarily. Also, if you contribute monetarily, you should also do the other part of that as well. But thank you, Scott, for asking, as always. Also, Kyle Wist over on YouTube also says, hello, Jason. It's always great to see your face. If anyone has any questions about the game, wants to hear a little bit more about it, feel free to drop those in now. Otherwise, if you're watching the video on demand later, feel free to drop it in the comments. If I can get an answer for you, I'll absolutely do that. Now, we've got, you've mentioned that this is the Desperation engine. You've also talked about there's 2 stories y'all are releasing right now. That to me indicates a couple things, that potentially there might be some third-party things coming in the future, or that y'all are potentially just creating more within this line. I always hate to ask this question before games even funded, but what are we expecting as far as some of the future of the Desperation engine and Desperation?
Yeah, well, I think a lot depends on how successful we are and how much uptake and interest there is in the game. So if you like it, definitely support us so that we know that we should make more. I am in the process of writing 3 more settings, experiences with using the same engine that actually are tied to these, that they take place in 2022. You're revisiting both of these stories through a contemporary lens. So you play archaeologists that are digging up the old town site in Neola in Kansas, and the other one, it's other stuff that's also related, but they go in really different directions to kind of push the boundaries of what's possible with the engine. I know friends that are also excited about making some stuff with it. Our good friend Jen Martin wants to make a Regency romance Desperation game, and I support that. I think that there's some obvious parallels there. Probably people won't be dying like flies, but they might be being rejected right and left, which is pretty great. So we'll see if it's successful, and if people like it, then we'll definitely make more and make the tools available for other people to make more as well.
Awesome.
It's a great question.
We already pledged. We already went on and backed earlier in the campaign, so I'm super excited to see that. I'm a huge fan of Bully Pulpit. It's really funny. This one caught me flat-footed. Like both, we tried it. I'm a huge Bully Pulpit fan, and then we try to support any RPG or storytelling game on GameFound at this point in time, specifically for that reason. So I'm super glad we were finally able to have you on for something, especially getting the project a little bit more support. Want to really encourage people to go over and check it out or share it at very minimum. Hopefully, maybe as y'all open late pledges or something else, we'll be able to have you back on to maybe play a game some point in the future too.
I would be glad to.
And so,
I would love to play with you.
But it's been a thrill to have you on. If anybody has any last minute questions, this is your last chance. I'm going to tell people about a couple things that we have coming up here on stream. Tomorrow we're sitting down and playing Rune Karen. It's a 2-player RPG. It's Souls-like, but also he released it before everybody was trying to release a Souls-like game by Colin LeSueur. We're going to sit down and play that tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. On Thursday, I'm sitting down with Nora Rose from Monkey Paw Games up in Canada to talk about a whole lot of things, specifically, though, the chapbook co-op, as we talk about how we create equity for small creators and how people enter into the design scene. Chapbook co-op's doing some very cool things. But I love the pink hack by Nora also too. I also love the way that she continually processes publicly around a lot of different realities that we're seeing in both the OSR and the indie sphere. So come back for another great conversation with Nora on Thursday. And then on Saturday, we're sitting down to play Cedar and Stone. Cedar and Stone is a sword dream game of wandering exorcist and discontent warrior poets. It is Together We Go game. Together We Go is our house OSR system that powers Down We Go, Through the Void, and a lot of other narrative forward, old school inspired games. This one is inspired by kind of Levant realities too. Very excited to sit down with ZW Garth to play that. If you like minimalist story forward games that draw on some traditional themes but open up kind of really cool egalitarian processes at the table, then you should check out Together We Go games. There's a link to a whole bunch of those from our recent jam in the description down below, but we're going to be playing Cedar and Stone on Saturday, so come back for that if you are able. Scott, thank you so much for backing. Super excited anytime somebody backs on stream. If you're watching now or later, just a reminder, the link to the game is in the description. We've also had it up on the screen. It's right below Jason's face, also too underneath his name, because we made sure it's in a lot of places that you can see it and get to it easily. We didn't have any more questions come in, but again, if you have them later on, drop them in the comments. We will be back to see you soon. Jason, if people want to find you online, want to follow more about Bully Pulpit Games, what's the best place for them to go to do that?
So on the social medias, we are at bullypulpit_HQ. I am at JM Star on Twitter. Those are probably the two best places to find us.
Awesome. Well, until next time, this has been Prestige Class with Jason Morningstar, and class is dismissed.